So I actually, so my life is mostly a mixture of actually um, health and medical content, startup content from like venture capitalists and so on, and like stoicism podcasts. I try very hard to not consume a lot within my like specific domain, and that was also this year was like somewhat conscious because um, with this, my job, I'm meant to be a generalist. I cut across many different industries, and so I need to be paying attention to what's happening in many different spaces. But I think what is also true of the times we live in more than in any other time is that what's happening in one industry in one country skips to other industries very, very quickly. And so, who would have thought that, you look at companies like Amazon, for example, right? And just like it's if you had been a retailer or a bank or a logistics company, 10, 15 years ago, and thought, oh, that's an interesting happening in the books industry, and defined it only as books as opposed to sort of the underlying guts of what makes that company run, you would never be able to see that, oh, actually, that's a really interesting thing they're doing with payments that could easily apply to our industry. And so I like sort of paying attention to stuff that's actually outside of my core world, because so much of our life right now is trying to forecast user behavior and what will happen in many different product lines that we invest in. I just find that even I have a sort of innate interest in it, I suppose, but I find that I'm paying attention to just a lot of news around health and epidemiology and so on, just trying to just stay like that fraction of a step ahead on like what might be, what might the world look like in Q1 of next year, Q2, Q3, and so on. And then I just think it's always just fascinating to pay attention to. Like my favorite podcast is probably the A16Z Anderson Horowitz podcast that just reviews all their investment companies and is fascinating, a fascinating look at what the future might be. And I find it just a breath of fresh air too, because inevitably it's people who are starting companies. And people who are starting companies, especially in this time, I think tend to be optimistic about the world. You have to be optimistic on some level, I think, to be an entrepreneur. And so I find that that's good food for the soul.